Hello everyone, I'm sort of just negotiating a bamboo thing right here. So welcome to the panel. It's got a very affectionate name. I've already been told by many people that this is probably one of the best named panels that they know that someone's been to. What we're going to do, we're just going to go down the panel first off and just do an introduction for about 5 or 6 minutes so you know who we are, why we're on the panel, where we're from, and I guess then we'll just get into the discussion. It's quite an open discussion and we'll talk about some of the challenges that are facing rivers and what our organisations are doing to make it a better place. So I'll go first. So I'm Eve Joseph and I am from British Triathlon. So British Triathlon is a national governing body, an NGB in the UK. We're funded by government essentially to run the sport of triathlon. So many of you may have seen at the Olympics and other places, triathlon has really grown in kind of sporting context over the last sort of decade really. And we're based up in Loughborough where there are a number of other sports organised based. And my role is their head of social impact. So 50% of my role is to look at sustainability and the other 50% is to look at our quality, diversity and inclusion. So I joined triathlon only in September. Before that I was actually at a tech organisation working in sustainability. And when I joined triathlon, one of the first things that the CEO came up to me and said to me was, what are we doing about water? Like, we're in a really challenging space. And I was like, well, where is your voice at the moment? Well, how are you having these conversations? Where are you having these conversations? And they were like, quite frankly, we're not having the conversations we know we should be having, but we know it's really important to our members and our athletes. So I'm sat on this panel because as part of my role at Triathlon and with all the other kind of CEOs and organisations, we came together as a water sports collective around Christmas time, and we all decided enough is enough, this isn't okay. We all have a number of athletes going into the water that are getting sick. We have a number of events that are being cancelled, they're being postponed, they're being changed. Even the test event for Paris last year was affected by the water quality, and everyone has eyes on Paris. Many of you have probably been opening the newspapers to listen to what's being said about the organising committee over in Paris. So yeah, around Christmas time there were 7 of us, and one thing I've been chatting to the panel about very briefly is a lot of these discussions are about the people that you meet along the way and what you can get done. So there was us, the Royal Yachts Association, Paddle UK, GB Outrigger, Angling Trust, Swim England and British Rowing. And we've all decided enough is enough, so we formed the Clean Water Sports Alliance. It was launched at the end of April. If you turn the BBC on that day, you would have seen it. At 6 AM, I was on a Manchester Canal side with my CEO and the RYA on BBC Breakfast talking about it. We were on Radio 5 Live, we were on Radio 4. Everyone within the BBC really took arms and really wanted to share the story. We're an alliance that launched. We didn't really know what was going to happen. What has happened has been incredible, and I'm sure as we go around the panel and we delve a bit deeper into what we're doing, I'd love to share more about what the alliance is doing. But all I will say is it's amazing what happens when sports come together and decide they want to do something. We're a pretty powerful voice. Amazing. Is someone... Timing. But yeah, about to jump in. We have been really impressed with the amount of people that have asked for our opinion now. We're having lots of different discussions with different people within the water ecosystem. And yeah, I'll share more about it later, but that is my introduction.
Great, thank you, Eve. Just before I start, I heard a really funny story about the Paris Olympics yesterday, about Macron saying, you know, he committed to make the Seine completely safe and clean, and he said, on this particular date, we will swim, I will go and swim in the river to prove that it's clean. And there's a massive social media campaign in France where everybody geographically is positioned to drop a big turd into the waterway system so that it will coincide at exactly on the day that he is meant to go swimming. So brilliant. Look out for that, apparently it's true. That is up shit creek for Macron. Macron, we thought it was the snap election that put him there, but no, it was his own silly commitment. So my name is Sian Sutherland and I'm co-founder of an organisation called A Plastic Planet. I'm probably the most unlikely eco-warrior you'll ever meet. I come from the world of business. I most recently co-founded and ran a skincare brand, so I cannot tell you how many millions of plastic bottles I've personally pumped out into the environment over a decade without really thinking about what happened to them next. Shocking to admit that to you all now, but 10 years is a long time in the world of plastic. 9 years ago, I was invited to advise the Hong Kong board, who were making the first documentary about the problem of plastic in the ocean. It's a documentary called A Plastic Ocean. It was pre-Blue Planet 2. So that was my epiphany. That was my unbelievably rapid learning curve of realizing what we are doing to the waterways, to our soil, to our air, obviously to our oceans every single day. And I couldn't leave the plastic problem alone. And I wondered if there was a way of creating a different kind of organization, not a charity or an NGO, but an organization that was pro-business, pro-solution, that would ignite and inspire the world to turn off the plastic tap. So since then, like yourself, I've met the most extraordinary people. Within the first year, I was speaking at the UN in New York. We're very involved in the UN now in the Global Plastics Treaty that is happening right now. Some of you may be aware we're 2 years into the negotiations on that, meant to be finalized in South Korea at the end of this year. That's up shit creek. That's looking really dodgy. The fossil fuel lobbyists are unbelievably influential in that whole process. We work a lot on solutions, and we work with industry like Kraft Heinz on how can we eradicate plastic sachets, Unilever on big plastic bottles, all of those brands, because I don't think it's good enough to force governments to create, lobby governments to create new legislation, taxation, laws, force industry into a corner, but then not help industry change. Because having run a business myself, I know it is nigh on impossible for industry at scale to wean themselves from this toxic and indestructible material. We co-founded the Plastic Health Council, so we'll talk a little bit more later about the impact of plastic and the toxins, the chemicals within plastic that impact not only our rivers and our soil, but obviously our oceans and ourselves, our own bodies. And that represents the world's leading scientists who are the bravest, the most outspoken, decades of research on the impact of endocrine disrupting chemicals on human health. We became acutely aware of this knowledge gap between the creative community, because if you think about it, everything, this building, what we're wearing, my phone, everything that we know in the world is designed. It has a primary creative process. And yet that audience, the 160 million global creatives of the world, are not trained and educated to use new materials, to think without plastic, because it has been the default for 50 years. So we wanted to connect that audience with the plastic-free systems changers and the materials makers. So we built a platform launched at the World Economic Forum in Davos last year, hosted on plasticfree.com, really to connect them, to ignite, empower, educate the creators of the world so that we can design waste out at source. And with that, I will hand over to Elliot from Blue Marine.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Sean. I'm Aisling, I'm from Blue Marine Foundation and I'm our Ocean Climate Policy Officer. So a bit more domestically focused. I think a lot about policy, what needs to change and what needs to improve massively to help our oceans. We're here today because Blue Marine, typically as Amber will know very well, primarily focus on overfishing as the biggest environmental challenge that we face. And whilst that is definitely the case, I guess sometimes the public think of overfishing as, catching too many cod, catching too many whiting, but actually the types of fishing technologies that we use include bottom trawling, and actually the amount of carbon that bottom trawling can release back into the water column and subsequently back into the atmosphere can have a massive impact on our climate as well. So my role is basically to work out how we can use the ocean not only as a way to kind of make sure that we have food security and biodiversity security, but also to help us in the fight against climate change. The reason I'm here today to talk about Up Blank Creek is because I recently published a paper with our good friends of Surfers Against Sewage, who I'm sure you're all very aware of. They are a phenomenal charity, and we came together to kind of bring the problem of sewage pollution in our rivers, where people kind of commonly think about it, and think about how that actually impacts the biodiversity of our coastal areas. We're an island nation. We have 12,500 kilometres of coastline, and when you think about the amount of spills that are happening, there's no way that can't impact on the ability of our ocean to do good for the planet. So we came together with a phenomenal team of academics at Project Seagrass, and I'll go into this a bit more further in the discussion because it is my baby and I adore it, to talk about the kind of implications of sewage, particularly on seagrass. And as you can imagine, it's not great. So we are here today to talk about that, and Blue Marine are definitely taking a bigger role now in talking about the climate capacity. I do also in my role a lot of government affairs. big week next week. I hope you've all registered to vote. So we're all thinking about how we can kind of try and encourage our politicians to think about this in a pragmatic way, in terms of what policy legislation needs to change, what we need to see improve, and definitely in the water quality space. It's been a real learning curve, because in a previous life I actually worked at DEFRA. So I was there for 4 years. I worked on both marine and water quality policy. So it's been a great move to come to Blue, to say the least, but also it's been fantastic to use that knowledge of the inner workings, let's say, and actually understand maybe why things aren't happening the way that optically the outside would see. So having been privy to many a conversation of how things actually work, it's been fantastic to bring that to Blue, and I think we're here today to really bring the link together. I think we've seen from a lot of our political parties, there's a lot of talk about sewage and only sewage on human health, which is obviously incredibly important, but it becomes you have another string to your bow if you can talk about it not only impacting humans but also impacting biodiversity and the climate. Why wouldn't they want that? Why wouldn't they want to use that when they approach these water companies? So our oceans are so important to me particularly, and I'm sure everyone here as well, so I'm really excited to delve into how the water quality impact can be felt in our coastal areas as well. And I'll pass to Kyle.
Thank you. Well, I'm Kyle. I am the head of UK at Klein Earth, and I also look after Klein Earth's European Food, Ocean and Land Use Program. So I'm a lawyer. Klein Earth is got 300 staff. Many of them are lawyers, a number of other professionals. We work together to bring strategic interventions in the law, use the law to try to improve human health and the environment globally. We have a presence across the world, North America, Europe, Asia. We work with partners in Africa and South America. We basically look at the biodiversity and climate crises and work across what we call system change in a number of different areas to try to bring strategic interventions for the better. So, we have different buckets of systems that we work in: energy systems, transport and materials, and we also work on food, ocean and land use, which is my area of special interest. And to do that, I'll get into some of the legal stuff we do, but to do that we bring different kinds of lawsuits and other forms of advocacy. One of the results we had just recently in May was on the UK's net zero plan, which you might have seen written up in the press, where we challenged the government's existing plan because it was not adding up in terms of how emissions fit together to eventually get to net zero. And that was overturned in the court, and now the next government has to produce a new plan by next May. So we're looking forward to see what happens there. But that's just on the climate side. I've got a case going on now, a couple of cases actually around this topic of river pollution, and looking at agriculture specifically as opposed to water companies, and also at sort of the topic of nitrogen and nitrogen pollution, and how it's sort of, I always call it a poor second cousin to carbon. Whereas carbon, for good reasons, has gotten all the attention, it's time to also doing something about nitrogen and phosphorus pollution as well, which we'll get into, and I'll talk a little bit about that intervention and how we'll get into hopes and fears, I think, right? But mine will be about government action or inaction probably, but I'll come on to that. Anyway, that's me.
Fab. Okay, so now you've had a little bit of an intro about us. We thought we would start off by talking very much about something that's quite high on the agenda at the moment when it comes to polluted rivers and oceans, and that's human health. So I think Sean and I are going to talk a little bit about the perspective of our organisations on human health. Before then, Aisling starts to think more about the marine health and that amazing project that I can't wait to hear about, and how we might be able to be involved. So, right, when it comes to human health and sports, you can't really open a newspaper these days without realising how imperative physical activity is to human health. And the sport that I represent is triathlon. We have such a reliance, quite a unique reliance on the natural world. We swim, we bike, we run. The majority of that is outdoors. We need nature, we need good ecosystems to try and bring that to life. But we want people to do it in a healthy way. And what we've noticed over the last few years is that actually two parts of our sport are being quite heavily impacted by climate change. So one is the swim and the other is also air quality when we think about the bike and we think about the run. So when it comes to human health, there have been a few situations over the last few years in swimming, in triathlon, in rowing most recently with the Oxford and Cambridge boat race that you probably all saw, where we're putting athletes and participants into water and they are coming out unwell. What this led us to think about as an entire group for the Alliance was, where are the situations most dire and where can we really try and impact and make change? So the Alliance has come together underneath the vision of, we want healthy and nature-rich blue spaces. So we want both. We want it to be healthy for humans, but we also want it to be nature-rich for the wider ecosystems. And there are 3 key areas that we're focusing on to try and improve this in the human health space. The first one is, essentially, we want to make sure regulators are adequately funded, which is going to be a really big challenge over the next few years, to hold polluters accountable. It's something that other NGBs, so Paddle UK and the Royal Yachts Association, have kind of been working on a local level with local government up until now. But until we came together as a group, we couldn't really work out, well, is that what we're really asking for? And after the last kind of year, we realised, yes, the law is there. We need people to start implementing it. We need regulators to start really holding polluters to account. The second one, which I'm most excited about because of my tech background, is whenever you are thinking about your health and whenever you want to go and do something, you usually have pretty good data, so you can make an informed decision before you go ahead and do what it is that you're about to do. With water, we think the data and the information coming out of the organisations is pretty, what's the word I should use? It's not very consistent and it's quite siloed, and trying to get access to this data can be quite hard if you're a participant of a triathlon or any other sport. If you want to know that the water that you're going into is safe, where do you go to find that information? So I had to go on a really big learning curve for this over the last 6 months to understand the concept of a bathing water. So just raise your hand if you have seen a bathing water sign near where you have bathed or swam in open water. Okay, cool, we've got one. See, this is already starting to not start well. Put your hand up if you would even know where to look. If you just saw a beautiful bit of river and you're on holiday for the weekend, would you even know where to go to find out if that bit of river was a bathing water or was clean? Okay, sort of 1.5, sort of, okay, cool. The point is, not everyone's putting their hand up, and rivers are supposed to be accessible for everyone. So I found out through this process with the rest of my Alliance team that the bathing waters that do exist, of which there are not many in the UK, we only actually had 3 rivers until about 3 months ago. All the others were coastal, which is great. A lot of them were in kind of the good category. We had 3 rivers in the entirety of England that were approved as the bathing water. Yeah, it's pretty shocking. Those 3 rivers, they're only being tested between May and September. So if any of you are fans of Wim Hof and the new kind of cold water plunging experience that we're all in, if you're plunging anywhere in inland water in the UK between October and April, it's not being tested by the Environment Agency to be designated as a healthy bathing water. So all of this kind of information was coming through as we were starting to think about events. Now the good news was, our event organisers and the people that run sporting events, they know this stuff, and they have been, and we have rules in place within any of our accreditations to run events where water has to be tested. So the good thing is, the sports were safe in that people are going into water where it has been tested. If water is tested as poor, the event will not happen, the event can't run and it has to be cancelled, and that's what's been happening. But what we're starting to see is greater participation amongst the general population going into water everywhere. And we as an organisation and as a group of governing bodies didn't feel like it was very responsible that lots of people were getting into water and not knowing what they were getting into, quite frankly. So the second piece of what we're trying to work on is to improve data and give you all better access so you know exactly where you are going. We have had 22, I think, more inland rivers designated as bathing waters. We were on the call with the EA the other week as an alliance, and we kind of asked what the situation was with most of them, and the gut instinct is that most of them are going to come up as poor, which is not a great situation to be in. I then found out, and this is a really pertinent message, I only found this out on Friday, and I'm going to share that it came from a guy called Chris Kent, who's from the Angling Trust. He is one of our co-founders. And sadly, I literally found out 2 hours before this session that he's just passed away. And I only spoke to him on Friday. And he left me with a really poignant moment on Friday, which I've been telling everyone until today, and now it's even more poignant. There is currently no regulation. If a bathing water is stipulated as poor, the EA can go back to a water company and tell them and say, you know, this river in your constituency or whatever, and your catchment area is poor. Here are the recommendations to move it from poor to good, so it's much better for human health. The water company actually don't have to do anything. And Chris was on the phone to me, and he was sort of laughing as if I didn't know. And I was like, Chris, I don't think many people do know that there is no stipulation to say that they must do anything. So what will happen is, for the next 4 years, that bathing water will be tested. And by the end of that 4 years, it's still poor, so it can't be a bathing water anymore. And so it falls off the system. So, yes, I know, this is quite a situation that all of us as NGBs have been on the journey to learn. So the second piece is really, we want to improve data so anyone getting into water knows that they're going into safe water. We also want to bring a event management guide across all sports. So it doesn't matter if you're a canoeist, if you're a triathlete, if you're getting into a yacht or a rowing boat, the water is consistent and we know that it's always safe. And then finally, for obvious reasons, we want the government to sort of start thinking less about a bathing water and more about a recreation water, so that everyone going into the water is safe and is tested more often. The testing is mainly for E. coli and the name that I'm never going to be able to announce, but it's like intestinal enterococci, that one, bacteria. That's what's being tested for at the moment. Again, we want to see if we can improve what's being tested for. You've already spoken about different chemicals, pharmaceutical, agricultural runoff that's happening into the waters. In terms of human versus animal welfare within waters, it is not the same system. So that's another thing I didn't really realise. I kind of thought if it's safe for humans, it's safe for animals and vice versa. The EA treat them differently. So just another fascinating journey I've been on over the last kind of 6 months. So from a human health perspective, we're trying to connect it to physical activity. We're trying to encourage more people to get into the water, but we want to make sure the water's safe. And as an NGB, we're taking it upon ourselves with others to try and see how we can, on your behalf, escalate this with government, with water companies. We're working very closely with Surfers Against Sewage and others like that. So, yeah, that's kind of...
wow. Can I ask you a couple of quick questions?
Please do.
One
I don't promise I'll know the answer.
When you talk about a safe bathing area,
Yes.
could that be a section of a river? Because surely the water is flowing.
Yes.
So, or is it the entire river?
No, it is a section. So it's considered, most bathing waters they'll have like a small way of getting in, because obviously also you have to have a safe place to get into a bathing water. So no, it is not an entire river. So a river can have 3 or 4 designated bathing areas, but it doesn't mean the whole river is safe. So
right.
yeah. So
but if something upstream was contaminating, that could happen one day and not be noticed.
Yeah, so the storm overflow and kind of that testing comes into fruition there, which is why I would all recommend you go onto the Surfers Against Sewage page. Storm overflow data has now been released. It's live data. It is live, I'll give them their dues, it is reported within the same day, but Surfers Against Sewage do a better job of collating all of that data and essentially giving you a traffic light of the coast. What we're trying to do is traffic light the inside. We've got the coast, we now need to traffic light the inside.
Right, sorry, my final one was, you mentioned April to October.
Yeah.
Is that when they test?
Yes.
So they don't expect anybody to swim outside those months?
No. You're not swimming in bathing water surely in November. No, they only test. I think it's up to 20 times in that time space that they test. So it's not even, every day or anything like that. They kind of go at sporadic times to test 20 times.
You mentioned only 3 rivers were safe.
Yeah.
Or is it only 3 rivers are tested?
Only 3 rivers were designated as bathing waters, yes. We're now up to, I think, 25, because I think it was 20 or 22 were added in only last month. So the EA are now going through the process of bringing them into the bathing water. So definitely go onto the EA's website and check the list. What I will say is super interesting. So we were on the bathing water committee discussion the other month, and they would say, yes, welcome that we've put in 20 or 22 new bathing waters. And we're like, brilliant, so next year you'll bring on 40. They're like, oh, no, we've closed applications for next year. I was like, oh, okay, cool. They're like, yeah, we've really got to bring up these 20 to a good place. So they've actually closed bathing water designation until next year.
It doesn't necessarily mean that the ones they haven't tested are unsafe.
No. Sorry, I should point that out. There are lots of water that is safe to swim in. I'm just saying from a designation.
Right.
They haven't been designated yet. I mean, Scotland is beautiful. England is the lowest out of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales in terms of water quality, but that's when things like the state of the rivers by River Action come in. No, swimming in the water. The other thing I will say is it's also quite personal. So for example, I've been swimming in the water for near on a decade and I've never been unwell from swimming in any of the rivers, and I used to live in Reading, which is on the Thames, and I never got unwell. So this is the other challenge when it comes to human health. A lot of the sickness can also be attributed to individual differences, and individuals that go into the water maybe having suppressed immune systems or going in already unwell. That's another thing we see quite a lot with participants and athletes. They go into the water and they're already unwell, so they're more susceptible to becoming unwell. So yeah, I'm not saying that not all rivers are safe to swim in any way, shape or form. I'm just saying from a legal and a designation perspective, we should be doing better at testing these waters.
Thank you. So let me tell you about a toxicity that you have zero choice of inhaling, drinking, eating in any way. Whereas at least we can decide if we want to go into a river. We can decide if we want to do wild swimming, but you can't decide if you want to breathe or not. And that's part of my obsession really with plastic, is it's a fundamental human right. People say, oh, plastic is like, this generation's smoking. It's so much worse than that. I could choose if I want to smoke or go into a smoky bar, but I cannot choose if I want to drink water or eat food or breathe air. There is not an inch of our planet that we have not infected with this incredible but toxic and indestructible material. It's so omnipresent in our lives. It's really easy for us to think that it's on the periodic table. So it's like aluminium or cobalt or one of those. But plastic is a mixture of chemicals. Many of them are toxic. We use 16,000 chemicals to make plastic. 6% of that 16,000 are globally regulated. Only 6%. Somehow, over the 100 years in the life of plastic, it is the one material that has escaped global regulation of all kinds. We then have to look at where it comes from, and you can understand where the pressure groups come from, and obviously the fossil fuel lobby, aka Big Plastic, has enormous power. So the main thing that the scientists are concerned about with plastic and the chemicals is two kinds of toxicity. And there is the toxicity, of course, of the chemicals, which are largely the phthalates and the endocrine disrupting chemicals. The impact on human health is absolutely irrefutable. Male fertility is down 53%. The scientists reckon by 2047, men will not be able to reproduce in the old-fashioned way. Nobody is really talking about this. Ask your friends, how many of your friends are having to use IVF to conceive? Everybody considers this a new normal. Maybe we're waiting a bit longer to have babies. Maybe that's the reason. No, we live in a very toxic world. And our endocrine system, which is our hormone system that signals everything in your body, is under constant bombardment through many toxins, but hugely through plastic, because it's everywhere. It's in the paint on your walls, it's in your carpet. 70% of our clothes are now made out of plastic. It's in everything that we eat and drink, as I say. So they're very concerned about the chemical toxicity. And then, of course, the communities that live next door, that obviously people like Client Earth are really strong in representing. The frontline communities in Cancer Alley, in Louisiana, where they have all the fracking and the polymer manufacturers, the cancer incidence is 50 times the national average. So these communities are really living on the front edge. They are in the petri dish of humanity, of this big industrial revolution. But then there is another kind of toxicity, which is so interesting to me, and I only really learned the terminology of this recently, so I wanted to share it with you. And that's the toxicity of shape. So when you think about microplastics and nanoplastics, we often think they're little chemical poison pills, and we inhale them and we drink them, and they carry these endocrine disrupting chemicals, and that's the danger. But actually, the shape itself can be very dangerous, because they collect in our arteries. They've now found them causing, increasing the risk of stroke and heart attacks, because they are like little platelets. We did a recent event at the UN Global Plastics Treaty, where we brought a cancer specialist who is finding out that tumors, when they recognize microplastics in your blood, believe that they're food, they believe that they are nutrition, and they take them in, then they realize they aren't, and they metastasize much quicker. So that's the problem with shape. It's a little bit like, I don't know, who thinks asbestos is a toxic material? Me too. No. There is nothing toxic about the material and the chemicals within asbestos. It's shape. Because we inhale it, it goes into our lungs, tiny little shards, it punctures our lungs, and that is the problem. So you have these two kinds of toxicity. So that's why for us, representing the scientists and bringing this news constantly to industry is really important. Because the four-letter word that industry are most terrified of is risk. And that's where law comes in. That's the importance for us of organizations like Client Earth, because we as humanity urgently need a major mass lawsuit, which will probably be in America, around perhaps a couple who can no longer conceive a child, in order to push back and say, why is it still legal for industry to sell us the wrong thing? And then blame us, saying, well, you don't need to buy it. Well, we have no choice, because go into a supermarket today and it's everywhere. Go and buy clothing today, and as I say, it's 70% of all of our clothing. So it's really important that we're vocal about the health impact of plastic. But also what I hate is those headlines, those Daily Mail, oh, plastic's in tea bags, plastic gives you cancer, because that's not helpful to anybody. What we have to talk about is it doesn't need to be that way. The narrative you will hear everywhere is, but what else can we use? There's no replacements. That is bullshit. There is so much else that we can use. So we need to really get behind these small brands, some of the bigger brands, who are bringing these new materials to the fore. And I'll hand over to you, because of course, if it's impacting humans, what is it doing to every other living organism?
Well, thank you so much. I don't know if you want to come in on any of the health stuff before I
You
go
go
into
do it.
health of the ocean. So yes, thank you both so much. It's so fascinating, and I never want anyone to think that because I'm an oceans charity that I don't care about human health, because obviously I do. I just also care about the health of seagrass, which is not everyone's favourite, biota, but here we are. So at Blue Marine, we are obviously super keen on expanding our knowledge on climate, and particularly what the ocean can do to help against climate change. And I don't know if any of you have heard of blue carbon. So blue carbon, obviously fantastic, the ocean's the biggest carbon sink in the world, and as I said before, it's not only getting massively pressured through bottom trawling and the types of destructive fishing, but also this new problem of sewage pollution around our countryside. Oops, louder. Sorry, I need to be louder. Thank you. So we have a lot of sewage around our coast, as we've just been saying, and the problem with this is it doesn't only affect the health of humans, but the health of our coastal marine habitats, which are so incredibly fragile. In the kind of day and age of global warming and everything's temperatures rising everywhere, we're seeing these mass coral bleaching events happening in Australia and overseas, but no one's really talking about actually what's happening at home. And that's one of my biggest bugbears with DEFRA at the minute, is they will talk for hours about how fantastic the work that we're doing in our overseas territories are, but actually don't really do anything at home. So it's just incredibly frustrating, but I will go on to policy reform that's needed after. But so with seagrass, we worked on this report that I've mentioned with Surfers Against Sewage and Project Seagrass, basically to understand the effects of poor water quality on seagrass health. And as you were saying, Kyle, it's not just about sewage, it's about your agriculture, your fertilizer runoff, it's phosphorus, nitrogen, and the kind of everything else that comes with it. So it was super fascinating for me. It's kind of marine biology is my trade, but I've kind of fallen into policy. So to get back to the crux of it was just phenomenal. And it basically, the results came that not only does sewage, obviously impacts the seagrass, it stops it being able to suck up carbon, but because the excess nutrients in the water cause algal blooms. Algal blooms then sit on the surface of the water, block all the light getting down to the seagrass, stop it being able to photosynthesize, stop it being able to produce CO2 or oxygen. The ocean produces every second breath that we take, so it just has a massive implication, and it turns basically our seagrass from this phenomenal expansive carbon sink into a carbon source. So the seagrass not only dies, releases all the carbon it's sequestered for its lifespan, but because it dies itself, it then produces additional carbon. So it's just incredibly frustrating, because we've lost over 90% of our seagrass meadows since the 1980s. Blue Marine Foundation have incredible projects across the globe actively restoring seagrass in the Solent, I was just telling you about, between the Isle of Wight and Southampton and Portsmouth. And with all these sewage overflows happening and these spills, everything that we're restoring actively is just going to die anyway. So it's just incredibly frustrating, because you have these practitioners, ourselves and smaller scale ones as well, who are actively trying to put nature back where it once was, where it's been depleted, and these sewage spills are just ruining it and basically just taking all the work away. So it's been incredibly stressful because we are trying so hard to restore nature. I'm not sure if any of you were a part of the Restore Nature Now march on Saturday. Exactly, so it was a great day, and I think that's the key, is restoring nature. We have ruined it, and the sewage spills are ruined it, and plastic has ruined it. We need to put it back, and if we're actively putting it back and it's still getting destroyed, it's incredibly frustrating, to be quite honest. So there's all those problems with seagrass, but also seagrass is a massive nursery habitat for commercial fish stock. So people think that I harp on about climate and carbon, but actually these fishing communities who are all around our coastal areas, these livelihoods that have been there for years, those commercial fish stocks like cod and whiting use seagrass as their nurseries, and they use it as different parts of their lifespan. So if the seagrass is gone and dead, the fish have nowhere to live, the fish will leave, and then there'll be no fish stocks left. So I think there's everything's connected. This stuff that impacts human health, it's obviously so awful that it does that, but it's also going to impact potentially our food security. And that is an old spiel that I think the government use quite a lot, is the food security argument, but it's true. Like, if this keeps happening, we're just absolutely scuppered, as I would say. So it's been really amazing to look at, and I think the problem that I actually find with the policy side of things is holding government to account. So in a similar way where there's designations for river health, the government, one of their objectives under the Environment Act is that 70% of features in a given marine protected area will be good environmental status. So when I was doing this report on seagrass, I looked into, well, what is the environmental status of eutrophication, which is the kind of algal bloom process. And in the UK, it's good. And I was like, surely not, because it's just, there's so much sewage everywhere. How is this the case? And sneakily, I think the UK government measure the eutrophication across the EEZ, which is kind of the UK's jurisdictional water. So they're going to compare an offshore area, 12 nautical miles out, probably not much sewage there, take it with your inshore area, say in Southampton, and say, oh, well, average, it's good. So they're actually not taking account of the specific areas where the spills are happening. And so they're giving themselves a little pat on the back. And so it's just not really good enough, and measuring isn't right for circumstance. So it's incredibly frustrating to talk about, and I will happily afterwards if anyone wants to, about the problems with our government. But yeah, so just to kind of say that this sewage problem, it's so awful, but actually in the ocean, it affects you tenfold. It affects climate, it affects fish stocks, it affects biodiversity. So it's not so good.
It's not. So yeah, sewage overflows and associated with water company activity get a lot of attention. But as I said before, depends what country you're in, but something like 2/3 to 70% plus of pollution in rivers is from diffuse pollution sources and related to agriculture. Then you multiply that by thinking about that in this country, something like 70% of the land is devoted to agriculture. So there's a huge, environment out there that's supporting an activity that, as was mentioned earlier, has regulations on paper that are meant to control pollution, but it's very poorly implemented and enforced. And that's where we've come in to try to bring some interventions. I'll give you an example of one that also involves river action that I think quite nicely illustrates how difficult it is to change something, especially with government, and how you have to just keep going and going and going and going and going. So we brought a complaint last year to the Office for Environmental Protection, which you may have heard of, which is sort of like the successor to the European Commission post-Brexit. And they look after, their topic is environmental law and the UK's implementation of environmental law. They have a complaints process that anybody can use. It's a lot cheaper than going to court. It's a lot more efficient than going to court. Of course, you don't have the control that you might have if you were in court, but you sort of have to cede control to the OEP. But if you have a good complaint and they take it, then there's a possibility of them doing something, important with it. So we brought a complaint with WWF UK, and this was about the failure of DEFRA and the Environment Agency, names coming back again, to properly implement and enforce what was called the farming rules for water, right? So the farming rules for water are something that came in through EU law under the Water Framework Directive. And I know we're running out of time, so in a nutshell, we brought the complaint to the OEP and we said, look, DEFRA's got a published guidance on the internet that's you can look up that tells farmers, going back to this, someone mentioned working with business to give them the right kind of guidance and advice. That basically says to farmers, it's okay to break the rules. It's okay to break the regulations. And there's case law that says, no, you can't, government, you can't undermine legal regulations with government policy. It's not legal. So that was the essence of our case. Went to the OEP, and then in January, it took a while because they take their time to some extent, but in January of this year, they came back with a recommendation saying, DEFRA, we think you've broken the law. Your advice on the farming rules for water, allows people who are engaged with it to spread manure and use fertilizer over the amounts that the regulations actually require, and then gives them some sort of easy way out as a defense if they happen to cause damage. Okay, so we were like, yeah, wow, great result. Now, DEFRA, what are you going to do about it? Well, let's wait a minute, because River Action then brought a judicial review, which just wound up a couple of weeks ago, around the Environment Agency's enforcement level, enforcement activities, whether they were enforcing the law enough or, as the law requires. Unfortunately, the court found that the Environment Agency has a lot of discretion to enforce how it wants to, as long as it can arguably be said it's at least doing some minimum job in terms of implementing its statutory powers. But in a crazy situation, if you check out the case online, developed where the Environment Agency and DEFRA were actually arguing with each other in the case, even though River Action brought it, that about how you interpret these farming rules for water. Environment Agency, to its credit, saying they're pretty strict, and DEFRA saying no, they're not that strict. We're going to let people off the hook. Court stepped in and said, no, Environment Agency is correct. It was obiter, in other words, it wasn't the main part of the case, but nevertheless, the court ruled agency is correct. Regs have to be strictly interpreted to control pollution. DEFRA, you're wrong. Okay, so Office for Environmental Protection complaint resolved in favor of the environment. High Court ruling last month in favor of the environment, both against DEFRA for this guidance. Now, go onto the internet this evening and look up the guidance. It's still there. It's still sitting there on the internet under the DEFRA web pages, which means that any farmer anywhere in the 70% of the geography of the UK that I just talked about can tomorrow go out and pollute the river again. So now we have to chase and chase and chase and chase, and we'll see what this next government has to do about it.
Are we optimistic?
I'm not going to. I'm not going to comment. As a charity, we can't comment on.
Should we see if there's any questions from anyone? Because I'm aware we've only got 5 minutes left.
Eve, I'm just wondering if there have been some efforts underway to do citizen science and getting members of the public, particularly sporty members of the public who like going outside and running alongside rivers, to do E. coli tests. We had an example in the Bahamas of children who were being homeschooled on sailboats and testing water quality in different parts of the Bahamas. And they got to one place and they said, whoa, we can't swim here. And it really made a big impact. So I'm wondering if that would be a way to get more rivers being monitored.
Tested.
And really feeling that they can take ownership of them.
Yes, would you like a membership of the Alliance? So yes, point 2 around data. One of the things that we were really excited to read about is different pockets of citizen science underneath different banners of different charities. So like River Action have been mentioned. You've got Surfers Against Sewage. You've got lots of different charitable organisations doing like river cleanups, river paddles, river checks, river this. What we would love to do is bring our participants from our sport, so our rowers, our triathletes, people like that, from across all the clubs in the UK to exactly do that and bring in some citizen science. We're hoping the fact that we're NGBs can then also kind of raise the profile a little bit and try and lean on business and other organisations to come in and like help us both fund it but also accelerate it, because the cost at the moment to do testing, there is a cost associated. The test has to go off to a lab and it takes a couple of days to come back. There are organisations out there that you can almost do like a COVID test, like a litmus test for the river. River Action are great at doing that with British Rowing. They're doing some testing of the testing at the moment. They're piloting it across rowing clubs and it's proving really powerful. So yes is the answer. We want to encourage more. We just need to work out how we come together and get it all to do that lighting up, bring all the data together, because at the moment people do the citizen science and it's not stored anywhere centrally, so we can kind of lose it. So yeah, 100%. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I live in Devon and recently, like near Brixham, which is where there were recently lots of people get ill with water poisoning. And the local community solution to everyone not being able to drink tap water is ship in loads of bottled water in plastic. So obviously an issue happens and the immediate response is to go, we're not going to think about the environment, even though it's an environmental issue, we're going to ship it. Do you guys have any sort of suggestions or ideas of how we can try and encourage councils or encourage response people to think more broadly about how to deal with those situations rather than just short term?
It's a great question though, because we're going to be seeing it more and more. And it's not just about droughts, it's about floods. And when we have floods, we contaminate the water system, and so it is something that we need to build more resilience to. And perhaps it's as simple as having tankers and reserves that are filtered at the point of decanting them, because it kills me every time I see those, and I see those shed loads of plastic bottles, leaching into the water to then give people because they can't drink the water at home. It's just, oh my God, we're just so at war with nature right now.
I think to come in on that, kind of write, like, I know it's everyone says it, but like write to your local MP. I used to work with the minister with my civil service hat on, and they do matter. If you have enough people kind of with the same cause, with the same agenda, berating them, they will have to respond at some point, and whether they do take it internally to their peers in government or not, but they have to respond. And so I think it's a bit embarrassing. They're not going to reply and say sorry. They have to respond hopefully with something tangible or something at least a little bit helpful. And I think people forget that that's kind of not that they forget, but I think it's not as actioned as it could be. And I think there's real power in the kind of a united voice from a constituency or a group of people. And so if you have kind of peers who feel the same, just get as many letters as you can, because it will annoy the heck out of them, and then they might reply and do something. Yeah.
Great. Should we do a little wrap?
Yes, and I think what we should wrap on is either we need to share very quickly what excites us about the current situation with water and what is currently terrifying us. And we're going to start with Kyle, I think, instead of me.
Well, there's some really incredible things internationally that have been happening, including the last COP biodiversity COP outcomes, which included an international commitment to cut excess pollution in waterways. So on paper, there's increasingly very interesting and inspirational things happening. But it's about what's happening on the ground and implementation that's scary. And what's doubly scary now, when I was coming back from my holiday yesterday, I was listening to this sort of anti-green stuff that's going on now in Europe and possibly in the US and elsewhere in the next few months. And people have to, people who care about this stuff have to redouble their efforts, because it's hard to believe, but that the world is still capable of going that way. But it's scary that it might.
What excites me, start on a good note, is the sheer amount of people who came out for nature at the weekend at the Restore Nature Now March. It was unbelievable, and I work with this stuff every day, and it's hard sometimes, but actually it gave me it's so lovely to be just before London Climate Week, and everyone's here listening, and so I'm genuinely so excited, because I think people understand that it's now or never, and I'm hoping that that push from Saturday will just continue on for the next 100 days of the new government, whoever that will be. But I suppose in another way, that's my terrifying thing. Elections are happening. People haven't been great on nature across the piece in the manifestos. It's been incredibly disappointing. So just I'm terrified for my own job, to try and hold these people to account to make sure they actually deliver something when and if they get in.
Yeah. So I'll keep mine to plastic, to keep on topic. So the thing that I'm most excited about is what the materials of the future are going to be. And I think we have no idea. We're in the brink of a material revolution. And at the moment, we're replacing things that we know, like, I don't know, plant leather, things like that. We're still in that world of the vegetarian sausage. Like, okay, we know we shouldn't really eat so much meat, so we'll make something that looks like meat. And we're doing that with materials, but what I'm excited about is what are those materials going to look like that we haven't even imagined yet, with all the technology and our new relationship with nature that we have to have, which is truly regenerative. And the thing I'm most terrified of is that we will continue to believe that recycling plastic is the answer, because we have been fed that placebo pill for decades, and I cannot tell you how hard it is for people to unlearn. We still think it's better than nothing, and actually it's not, because it makes us think we're doing something, and all we're doing is putting it back into a broken system and allowing people to keep pumping it out at the tap. So that's the thing I'm most terrified of.
Gosh.
Over to you.
Okay, what excites me the most is what we're actually going to achieve as sports. All of our sports are growing. I'm so excited to work with more triathletes, more rowers on what we can actually do to enact change. What terrifies me the most is how slow change is happening, and it's worrying me so much. And I heard something the other week which I would love to close on, which is, you know, we're looking at the planet and we're looking at going to Mars and we're looking to go everywhere else. What is the first thing we're looking for? We're looking for water. And so the slowness of change is terrifying me, because instead of fixing the water situation we have on our own planet, we're just trying to go to another planet and finding water, and that seems absolutely bonkers to me.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.